Shah, President FICCI, to please give his address.
Thank you and good afternoon to all of you. I want to start off by thanking all of you for this opportunity. We are happy to have Ms. Rita Tiotia, Commerce Secretary, Government of India here, all my other colleagues and friends on the dais. It's a great honor, great opportunity to be here. I also want to apologize because I have a meeting in the Prime Minister's office after this, so I'm going to leave after my opening remarks. But thanks to all of you, and on behalf of the ASEAN India Business Council, AIBC, I want to extend a heartfelt, warm welcome to all of you for this business session of the Delhi Dialogue 10. Friends, Government of India has extended its continuous support to the Business Council, and it's evident by the invite extended to AIBC by the Ministry of External Affairs to be the partner for this Delhi Dialogue. Madam Secretary, I'm pleased to share with you that the AIBC had its internal meeting earlier in the morning today, and we had strong attendance from both Indian and ASEAN members. And a lot of interesting ideas were discussed. Obviously, as happens, a lot of issues were also aired. And we have promised all the members that we will collate these ideas, collate these issues, and follow up on that. Because we were also told by one of your colleagues in the Ministry of Commerce that we have to not only focus on the activities and the conversations, but we also have to focus on the outcomes. We also discussed the strong need and the responsibility that the industry has to further the relationship between India and ASEAN. Both the government of India and the governments of all these ASEAN countries have made a lot of headway in opening up a lot of opportunities, but it's now up to the business to go out and capture that. In the morning, the key discussions were around trade agreements, preferential treatment, market access, partnerships in technology skills, connectivity, as well as opportunities to share experiences and information, and information about especially women in the workforce, women entrepreneurs, women on board members, because in AIBC, one of the things we are doing is ensuring that there is a lot of women participation so that the women entrepreneurs and the women from both India as well as the ASEAN countries also, as part of AIBC, come out and air their issues, share their experiences with each other, because we see that India and a lot of ASEAN countries, the issues are fairly similar, the experiences are fairly similar, and if we can cross-pollinate ideas, if we can discuss our experiences, there'll be a huge amount of benefit. Because the idea is not only to focus on economic and business issues, but also to focus on socio-cultural and other issues also. There are a huge amount of synergies, complementarities which are there between India and ASEAN. We have long historic ties. A lot of people from Indian origin are in these countries. They are running great businesses, and this Indian diaspora itself is one of the strongest advantages India has as we connect our countries with each other. Over the centuries, we have shared art, we have shared culture, and we have also shared a lot of other socio-economic ties. Ma'am, we identified these sectors of cooperation to be spread across from infrastructure, health, education, skills, technology, pharma, biotech, including the new areas of IT, electronics, and defense production. We also spoke about the fact that India's golden age is starting. India is now one of the largest countries in the world at $2.5 trillion We recently saw that we are now the 6th largest economy in the world in absolute GDP size point of view, and we are doubling our economy size every 7 to 8 years. So this golden age of India will present a lot of opportunity for our friends and partners in the ASEAN countries. The Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP, which has been signed during the 21st ASEAN Summit in 2012, is helping explore these opportunities even further. Our idea is, can we provide a framework to reduce the trade barriers, to reduce issues around market access for goods, for services, and allow the businesses in the region to have a much larger set of opportunities in each other's countries across India and ASEAN. We do believe that RCEP will have a great impact on trade relationships, on investments across our countries, and along with the other FTA partners as industry, we explore and implore our governments to work towards mutually beneficial scenario. In fact, one of the larger opportunities that will come out is not only trade and investment amongst us, but using each other's countries, using each other's competitive advantage to cater to third markets, to cater to markets outside of our countries also. And that could be a huge opportunity. Especially we are seeing that more and more countries are coming to India, not only just to access the Indian market, which itself is huge and growing, but also to access Indian capabilities, India's skill sets to cater to third markets outside of this. We have spoken about Indian economy, but I think the three engines of India's growth, India's investment opportunities, India's consumption growth, as well as India's savings that are being generated by our country, all present a huge amount of opportunities for all of us, Indian companies as well as our partners in ASEAN. In terms of recent developments, ma'am, in the last 2 months, we have taken technology and defense industry delegations to Singapore, Vietnam. Early this month, we had an industry interaction with Indian ambassadors to ASEAN and ASEAN ambassadors in India to again discuss possibilities and challenges and how to overcome this. There are a lot of problems, but these problems are also opportunities, because once we overcome the problems, once we overcome the challenges, we can grow even more. 2 days ago, we jointly met with the Embassy of Philippines and the Trade Office to organize a buyer-seller meet for the visiting delegation from Philippines. In the coming month, we'll be taking a delegation of medical equipment and pharma companies to Yangon. So I can go on and on. The opportunities are huge. I think everybody in this room will underscore that. But since we have only so much time, and a huge and a very esteemed panel with us, I will not take a lot of time. I'll invite my colleague and friend, Dato Ramesh Kodamal, to also give his welcome remarks, but not before once again thanking all of you for being here and giving us this opportunity on behalf of AIBC. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Okay. Good morning to all of you. First and foremost, I think today is a great day that we all are here today on the 10th Delhi Dialogue. As we all know, that 9 Delhi Dialogues have gone through with the ASEAN-India relationship, and ASEAN-India relationship is moving forward. And today on our panel, we have wonderful speakers who are going to speak on different aspects, what ASEAN and Indian relationship can take us further with. This morning, we have the Commerce Secretary, Ms. Rita Tiotia, Dr. Sok Sipina, who is the advisor to the Royal Cambodia and head of Cambodian delegation today, Mr. Karan Singh Thakral from Singapore, Chair for Singapore for AIBC, and also we have Shanti Samtani, Chair from Indonesia. And I'm very pleased this morning to say that we had a very fruitful meeting in the morning to discuss in-depth issues with government officials and members from FICCI and some friends, the ladies movement we are working with, to see that we incorporate a women's group, a women's wing within AIBC to work with the women in this platform. I think that is great. As we go on, we would like the women, the youth, to be on the AIBC platform to take this agenda further in relationship with ASEAN and India. That has been the objective of the government of India and the ASEAN government, to see that we support the ladies and youth. So that was a great discussion this morning which we had, and I'm very sure we are going to move forward incorporating the ladies in AIBC so that they can work with us and also look into the problems of the ladies around ASEAN and India and take them forward, and the youth who are dynamic can also help us here. This session will discuss on the complementaries between India and ASEAN in goods, services, and investments, take a stock of progress in areas of trade and investment, and discuss the ways to enhance trade investment relationship between ASEAN and India. ASEAN and India region together represents a combined population we have always been talking about. It's about 1.85 billion, which is a quarter of the global population, and the GDP is over 3.8 trillion. Some say it's close to 4, some say 3, some say 4.5. Usually, let's not worry about the figures. Let's worry that we are moving forward and we can see things happening. Creating one of the largest economic space in the world, economic partners between India and ASEAN is deepening day by day and witnessing a dynamic phase. For the first time, bilateral trade between ASEAN and India has crossed the 80 billion mark, the highest volume of trade in goods that ASEAN and India has witnessed since we signed the FTA in 2010. India is also a partner of the Regional Comprehensive Partnership Agreement, which has been negotiated. We hope that this agreement will be concluded soon so that we can have a bigger share of the market and work towards greater heights. ASEAN and India are also witnessing a relative high flow of investment. There's also mentioned that India is giving a special treatment to 3 developed countries in ASEAN. We call it a CMLV country, you can add in 4, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, and Vietnam. So with all this happening within the ASEAN region, we foresee that ASEAN and Indian relationship can only move further, trade can increase, and definitely everything, in every way, we might have some problems. But problems are here for businesses to sort out and take the agenda further. With that, I would like to call upon Rita, Commerce Secretary of India, to say a few words in a speech. Please, ma'am. Yes.
A very good afternoon, and I'm indeed very happy to have the opportunity to address this very select group at the 10th edition of the Delhi Dialogue on a topic which I think is of tremendous importance, ASEAN-India trade, investment, and technology. I believe the Delhi Dialogue, from its much smaller beginnings, has now come to emerge as an institutional forum on India-ASEAN relations. And the kind of discussions and the kind of professional engagements that we see at this forum have actually, in no small measure, contributed to strengthening the relationship and the understanding between ASEAN and India. Perhaps much of the conversation which would have preceded this would have talked about the government of India's policy of Act East. But this year itself, we began by hosting the ASEAN-India Business and Investment Meet and Expo, and a series of events that focused on trade, business, and investment as a run-up to the ASEAN India summit. And we were happy to find that the investment and trade ministers from all member countries were actually part and deeply engaged with the entire process. We followed this with an informal mini-ministerial of the WTO that we hosted at Delhi on 10th and between 20th March of this year. And this, which was attended by 52 members of the WTO, also saw an overwhelming presence of the ASEAN members. I think this signifies not just India's very growing and active participation with ASEAN, but it's also a reflection of the kind of mutual collaboration which has begun to develop across a wide range of issues and strengthens our mutual commitment to multilateralism. In fact, the kind of commitment that ASEAN and India have shown continuously through multilateral and plurilateral arrangements is a combined voice in the world today. Forgive me, I have a bad throat, towards protectionism. I would like to comment on a few aspects of this relationship. The Asean model is the most successful, regional integration experiment to have taken place in the post-World War II period. Through a process of dialogue and reconciliation, ASEAN has been able to create a peaceful and stable environment in the region. Thanks. In the region, and has enabled millions of its citizens to come out of poverty and to lead decent, prosperous lives. The other big success story that we look at towards ASEAN is the well-developed infrastructure, and that's an example worth emulating. This massive infrastructure that has been built in ASEAN has been built at substantially lower costs than most developed countries have incurred for similar kinds of initiatives. What this has done for ASEAN is to help it to achieve greater levels of trade competitiveness by facilitating seamless movement of goods and people across the region. These lower logistic costs enable ASEAN products to be competitive in global markets. It's also reflected in the greater intra-ASEAN trade, which is about 40% of its total global trade. In comparison, when we look at the South Asia region, the total trade is about 5%. And to that extent, this recognition is what is reflected now in our commitment to building the infrastructure for connectivity in South Asia and also with ASEAN. On the logistics side, this government has been extremely committed. One, in terms of focusing on infrastructure domestically as well as in the context of our neighborhood. Also in the sense of setting up a separate division within the Ministry of Commerce, which focuses on multimodal logistics efficiencies. Much of what we are doing is looking at the regulatory framework, the infrastructure framework, the rules and procedures that are in place, and to provide common platforms and architecture that will enable much greater efficiency. Our National Committee on Trade Facilitation has actually created groups that have concentrated on exactly these areas: the infrastructure gaps, the regulatory and legal requirements, the procedural simplifications that are necessary in order to enable India to cross the bridge in terms of logistics efficiency as well as trade facilitation. Complementing this environment of seamless trade what ASEAN has done is to develop a very well-developed global value chain in its region, where sourcing and selling has become much easier through the use of internet-based technologies, e-commerce platforms. We see ASEAN as a natural partner in our economic growth, and as our supply chains develop under the Make in India effort, it would probably be a logical extension to effectively link to ASEAN's regional value chains to greater economic gain for our region. We expect also that the nature of our business activity will change in the near future. The family-run businesses will undergo some changes. There will be more and more of joint ventures, joint collaborations, possibly with ASEAN enterprises doing business all over the world. These new models, these collaborative models of business activity should be welcomed, as they will bring in professionalism, competitiveness, and enable more integration with the global markets. Some uncertainties have come in at the current moment of time, with global trade somewhat in a turmoil and the rules-based system of multilateral trade being challenged. Trade wars, as are beginning to emerge now, have typically a cascading effect on global trade in many countries, even though they may not be directly connected to it. Collateral damage due to the trade wars has far-reaching consequences on the global economy. In a globally integrated world, the global supply chains are well entrenched, making products competitive in the markets. And a large number of persons would be hit even on domestic fronts by countries adopting trade protectionism. The tariff hikes that the United States initiated on washing machines and solar panels in last January have actually begun to take a toll domestically, with the users of laundry equipment, solar projects stalling. And these have come as a direct result of these duty hikes. It's apparent then that there will be no clear winners or losers in the trade war, because everyone will lose. The capacity to make adjustments and to look at alternative sources cannot be underestimated. And this is an effort that increasingly countries are beginning to make across the world. China, for example, as one of the largest buyers in the world, is beginning to source some of its agriculture and auto components from other countries. Certainly, India and ASEAN, because of their proximity, would look to access some part of the shift in market choices. But we do recognize also that any prolonged trade war is ultimately going to affect and damage each economy that is part of the global trade. Turning now to the architecture of India's engagement across the world, we have a web of a very large number of trade agreements, both comprehensive and preferential, each with different levels of ambition. The India-ASEAN FTA was one of the most comprehensive regional agreements when we signed it in 2010. The APTA is an older agreement, and it's limited because it's based on margin of preference and it's just focused on goods. Similarly, we have an arrangement with the Mercosur, which is a regional PTA, but again based on preference and focused on goods. We have more comprehensive agreements with Singapore, with Malaysia, with Japan and Korea. And currently, of course, the major engagement is on the RCEP, and I would like to come to that a little later. As markets around the world are becoming saturated, India would be looking to new and emerging markets in Latin America, Africa, CIS, and Middle East, and some of our engagements, some of our trade agreements that we have commenced work on actually reflect this shift. However, ultimately, trade agreements can be best utilized when they do not contradict fundamental positions and do not destabilize such positions. Let me turn briefly to the RCEP, which I think is a very significant part of our conversation with ASEAN. We believe that the proposed regional comprehensive economic partnership would take forward and further the objectives of our Act East policy. And a balanced agreement would enable gains for all participating countries and to help synergize complementarities across our region for greater economic growth, development, and prosperity. India has from the outset recognized the centrality of ASEAN in the RCEP negotiations, and we stand committed to constructively engage in these negotiations for an early and satisfactory conclusion. We've had 22 rounds, the 23rd commenced on the 18th. So there has been very active engagement. There have been both at the experts level, at the ministerial level, and last year at the leaders level as well. Since the Manila summit, RCEP trade ministers and negotiators have clearly intensified their efforts with the aim to bring RCEP negotiations to a logical conclusion. And at the meeting held in July this year, ministerial decisions were taken on a few important issues. What has been an area of concern has been that an FTA cannot be one-sided and focus only on goods. Comparative advantages, sensitivities, and ambition of member countries would have to be given due recognition in order to achieve balance. Leaving services and investments at very low levels of ambition does not augur well for an agreement that seeks to be comprehensive, modern, and forward-looking, as we envisaged in the guiding principles. RCEP would be incomplete if the services sector is not sufficiently liberalized, especially since services contribute more than 50% of the GDP of all the RCEP countries. Liberalization of services is also imperative at a time when the world is going through a sluggish phase of recovery, plagued by unsettling trade wars on the tariff front. I think the way forward is for RCEP to collectively ensure that it achieves a balanced and equitable outcome that enables inclusive gains for all 16 member countries. As enshrined in the guiding principles, RCEP must balance aspirations with sensitivities, taking into account the diverse circumstances of the participating countries. Necessary flexibilities would have to be allowed for countries to adapt and adjust to the challenges of an impending regional integration, which will include integration between bilateral pairings involving significant existing trade imbalances and concerns. I think if this focus is achieved, it is possible to conclude this agreement much earlier, because the commitment of all members to that end is most evident from the leadership to the experts. Let me look at the issue very briefly of investments. The growing economy, even at the current rate of around 7%, would inevitably take India to a 5 trillion economy in the near future. We have set for ourselves an ambitious target of $1 trillion in exports. Commensurate with the current level of growth in our exports, we believe that Indian investments will begin to flow outwards to areas where there are not only markets, but also locations which ensure peaceful and reasonable returns. The ASEAN region, in fact, fulfills all these conditions and would be the most attractive destination for India's outbound foreign direct investment. Enhanced foreign direct investment flows between the two regions is one of the major factors that enable integration of economies through regional and global value chains. Connectivity with the region, including transportation, maritime, aviation, road, and customs cooperation, is crucial for deepening this integration between the regions. We share a land border with Myanmar, and the Kaladan Multimodal Transport Project and the India-Myanmar-Thailand Trilateral Highway build on this. A majority of India's current outflows in the ASEAN region go to services, primarily in banking, finance, information technology, and IT-enabled services. ASEAN presents to India a business facilitative environment, low tax regimes, access to capital, and excellent infrastructure. About 2,000 Indian companies already operate in the ASEAN region, and 22% of India's outward global FDI stock is held in the ASEAN. The services industry constitutes 60% of India's total cumulative investment of about 53.3 billion between 2005 to 15. And manufacturing accounts for 32%. The rest is in the primary sector, that is agriculture, forestry, mining, and quarrying. This actually reflects the growing complementarity between the services-dominated Indian economy and the majority of ASEAN economies, where services has become the most important sector. And investors like Bharti, Airtel, TCL, Reliance Communication, Infotel, Jio, Infocom. In the infrastructure area, we've got Lanco, Punj Lloyd, ILFS, GRM, and Madhukon. The nature of the investments, and this is important also to note, in the ASEAN region is also of the joint venture type of activity, which is due to the need also perhaps of the companies to adapt to language, culture, and regulatory frameworks. Indian small and medium enterprises in the IT and IT-enabled services, including software development, accounted for 70% of the investment in the ASEAN region. I think these numbers are only to reiterate what the facts on the ground are, what the complementarities, not just in goods, but in services are between our region, and the logical connect that we can make in order to realize greater economic gains, greater employment for people in our countries. I'd like to stop here, but I think that the opportunities are opportunities that we should not miss, and the directions are very clear. It is up to us to take those decisions that would make them a reality. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for the wonderful input on ASEAN-India. Actually, what was just said, it matters a lot to all of us present here today. The input which has been given today actually can be thought and seen that there's a great future. ASEAN actually, in fact, has a relative liberal open policy investment. From 2012 to 2016, FDIs into ASEAN amounted to 589 billion on an average of 117 billion per annum. ASEAN offers Indian companies a huge market. We are seeing companies investing, and that's a great sign. I just was speaking on the sideline to Karan. He says there are a few thousand Indian companies in Singapore. In Malaysia, we have another few thousand. So that means we have got a liberal policy for investment, which we all should work together and see how this can be done. While India is promoting Make in India, a priority investment, barriers hinder ASEAN companies from investing in India. So if India wants to realize its objective to make in India, greater investment facilitation is needed. Perhaps a strong investment facilitation focal point must be set to address these issues. So we can work out something to see that how ASEAN companies find it easier to come to India. India has got a great opportunity. I was just speaking to someone yesterday, a company from Thailand. They have opened up a platform here to set up 100 stores to do wholesale provision in India. So that means ASEAN members are actually willing to come to India and work. I think we have to work together more closely to see how this can progress further. With that, I think now we'll have the next speaker, Mr. Karan Singh from Singapore, who is going to give us some insight into various things in ASEAN. Please, Mr. Karan Singh.
Good afternoon, friends. I'm listening for the last 1.5 days. I'm just going back a little bit in the history of our ASEAN and India side. Long back a few centuries, even a few thousand years. If you go back to our religion side, Buddhism was the first concept that moved into ASEAN countries. Today, 5 of ASEAN countries believe in Buddhism in a very strong way. If we take Hinduism, we have 6 countries. We have Indonesia adding into it. A whole island of Bali practice Hinduism as a culture. Then the cultural concept, social living, family started moving in. And many thousand years have passed by. Nothing happened. Then came in Jawaharlal Nehru, who really tried to start the ASEAN concept again. In 1949, there was a very big meeting in Delhi, then followed by 1955 in Bandung, Indonesia. But somehow both those didn't go through. Then actual business people started moving into ASEAN countries. First will be the Adit Babu Group and Tata. And Thaparji moved into Indonesia and Thailand. But again, only 3-4 houses went in, got very successful, but slowed down. Actual whole thing restarted in 1990, when Dr. Manmohan Singh and Prime Minister Rao started looking east and started liberalization of the local government. Then Vajpayee government took over very strongly and started proper concept of it. Then ASEAN was formed with India 25 years back. Then we have never looked back. If you look forward today, like ma'am was saying, our bilateral trade is about $80 billion. But compared to our GDP, we are hardly 2% of the whole GDP between ASEAN and India, totally 4 trillion. This is very small. We are big houses, have really started doing business with each other for a long time. Now what we need to move forward is how to take SME from India to ASEAN countries, and how can we take ASEAN SMEs back to India and start working together. There's a little fear on the ASEAN side, how we can move here. I would like to request the proper department make a proper presentation on SME side, how we can move SME from ASEAN countries. If you look at an SME alone, in Indonesia employ 90% of the workforce in SME. I don't have the Indian figures. The lowest is Vietnam, around 30%. That's the reason I've always figured SMEs. As ma'am is saying, India golden era is starting. ASEAN will love to take advantage of this golden area. We are signing a lot of agreement with each other, and we are very, very positive with it. Singapore has always been open arms to Indian companies, and we have a few thousand of them there. I chaired the session for 5 years. If any of you have any problem on that in Singapore side, please do let us know, or connect with FICCI or AIBC directly. We'll help you in any way we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Karan Singh, for your input. Karan spoke something about SMEs. SMEs from ASEAN and India, in fact, need much to reach out to each other, to expand trade. For example, China ASEAN Expo in Nanning, held around September each year, has provided a strong platform for interaction between ASEAN and China SMEs. So I hope that ASEAN and India could come up with a format, particularly in India, where I personally feel that this expo could be held once a year for SMEs at the same place, same city, and the timing should be around the same area. Because you have a fair in Frankfurt at the Hemtex. It does not move out of the first week of January. Then in Nanning, the dates are also set. And as such, Indian SMEs can start working together on this platform to see that they can have the ASEAN SMEs coming on this platform to work on. I've been suggesting this for some time. I hope, madam, you please take note of this and see if something can be done. It can be in Bombay, it can be in Hyderabad, it can be in Chennai, it could be in Delhi. Let any state, in fact, take this agenda up. I think it's going to be very helpful to the SMEs. The creation of a similar platform is required to promote this ASEAN-India SMEs to work together. I think the ASEAN-India Business Council is working with the Northeast states to forge closer economic ties. There are huge potentials in the region, and what is required is to set a platform for the business community. This is what AIBC is doing. We are trying to set up platforms for the businesses to take them forward to various states, because SMEs are the ones actually who face problem in penetrating into different areas. Even in ASEAN, the SMEs can't move within ASEAN. So talking of India is a far-fetched thing, but let's think positively. It is already happening in ASEAN. Singapore companies are setting up in Malaysia. We have Philippine companies setting up in Thailand, and Thai companies are going to the Northeast states. It's not impossible, but what we need here is we have to work towards it. And SMEs actually are about 97% of the workforce and businesses. So this is a very important issue for us to brainstorm on the platform and work together, and the governments from India and ASEAN must focus to see that this can happen. Because every government, if you look at it, speaks about how to take the SMEs forward. That is their main agenda. And I think it's a good suggestion. Karan, I think Singapore should start working on something to come up with ideas, because you all are very successful moving SMEs to all parts of the world. Maybe Singapore should come up with a plan to help us to see how ASEAN SMEs can be taken to India. Thank you. With that, I think we will have the next speaker, Shanti. She is from Indonesia. Shanti, please.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. I think I'll try not to repeat what the previous two speakers have very well detailed and put down the issues around ASEAN-India cooperation. I'll bring to you a very practical challenges that I see happening on the ground, which will, I think, resonate well with all of you, because you are all from businesses, and you would really want to know what are these corporations about. So before I get into that details of the challenges and suggest for solutions, let me just go back a little bit on the background. So what we have seen the last 20 years is there has been extensive cooperations, either in the form of agreements, in the form of FTAs, bilateral or multilateral, signed between ASEAN and the plus countries. And what you see here is the focus is very much on tariff. The focus was very much on non-tariff barriers, non-tariff measures. Focus was very much on land, building infrastructure across land. The Delhi dialogue, the 10th Delhi dialogue here today is very interesting, because it is bringing us a different sphere, a different perspective on maritime. And yesterday, Dr. I think Balakrishnan from Singapore did mention that if you were to put one container of shipment into land format, you would need 100 trail of trains. And no one can afford to do that. So what this tells us is that maritime is actually a solution of the future. The maritime provides a very practical a very sensible and very logical approach towards improving trade. Now, having said that, the second question we ask here is what kind of maritime cooperations do we need to look into? Since the discussion is at a very initial stage, I think this started sometimes in January and it's still at an infancy stage, it would be good from India's side and both from the ASEAN countries side as well to look into, do a bit of a scoping of the maritime opportunities. What are the things that both countries can do together in terms of trade, in terms of services, and in terms of knowledge, for example. And actually put that on the table. Just as this will help us begin to see what are the maritime cooperatives we need to get into. And it is best if this comes from the active participation from the businessman itself. Because you guys are on the ground, and you know what are the challenges and what are the opportunities. So really looking very closely into the maritime, and I will not get into the details because you have been here for the last 2 days and you heard the RCEP agreements and other details which was elaborated yesterday. But I would try to get into a more practical discussion here in the sense that get into that scoping stage, identify what are the maritime corporations which can promote trade or services from India and ASEAN and vice versa. Number 2 is to really look into the non-tariff barriers. See, we are very clear about what are the tariff barriers. It is written, it is set in the agreement, it is easy for us to read, understand, and follow. And as businessmen, we know if we are clear about the tariff barriers, then we kind of like know easy for us to follow. But what we actually are experiencing is the non-tariff measures and the non-tariff barriers, which from time to time could come up. So today, a businessman from ASEAN, I have one client. I run an advocacy company which helps businesses open up their operations in different parts of Southeast Asia. So I've got a few Indian clients who have managed to help open up business in Vietnam, Myanmar, and Indonesia, and working on some now. But and then I've got Indonesian clients also trying to come into Indian market. So the challenges that we often feel is that everything on paper looks good. We have this agreement which is fantastic, but down the road, there are these non-tariff measures which are put in place and which sometimes makes our jaws drop because we were like not really expecting this in the spirit of that. So we need to understand, or both sides needs to know that if this cooperation is to work successfully, both sides needs to stop themselves or control themselves from putting non-tariff measures or non-tariff barriers, which we see sometimes comes up even after signing an agreement and things popped up. So this is one thing, and I'm talking in a very practical terms because these are what the businessmen are actually bringing back into the table. Because all these things, that what the government is doing is to support the businesses. And we need to listen to the voice of the business as well. Just last, and number 3 is to really have a continuous mechanism where you could actually continuously supervise and monitor on what's happening with the cooperative and the corporations and the agreements. And one of the best ways doing that is to actively participate at ASEAN India Business Council. They have a very good team which helps the members and the companies monitor and supervise on what is actually transpiring on the ground, because they are every day talking with the governments in the region on the ground. So you need to actually get into that. The mistake some businesses do is they go venture in some country on their own. They have a local partner, everything is rosy, the honeymoon goes on, and then one day when suddenly they realize there's no more honeymoon and there is smell of bomb in the room and somebody is coughing, they go and look for a consultant and say, help us, what happened, right? So So this is actually what we are trying to do, and I'll quickly conclude here is what we are trying to do here. And I've actually prepared a presentation, which I'll not get into it. I would rather kind of like have this discussion. But what we would like to actually do is to really work closely with either FICCI, with ASEAN India Business Council, with the government. It is time that the government come together, close to us, to the council, and the businesses come together close to the government to monitor this, because again, all these efforts are made by the government to support the businesses. Just very quickly, the slide, I don't know who's changing the slide here, but I think you saw some pictures and all that thing, is that if you look at the geographical situation or location of India, and there's China, and then Southeast Asia is this side, India, and China is just above that. And you see the China reach has gone way beyond in Southeast Asia compared to the India reach. And I'm sure as businessmen, all of you realize that the speed at which China is venturing into Southeast Asia is a lot more to the speed of what India is trying to do. And I think if ASEAN India is to succeed, India being again the biggest, the largest, and I think the more experienced, India needs to aggressively lead into this. And it can't be like an RCEP case, which we were experiencing in the past, where the participation of India was very low and things were moving very slowly. But if this is something which India feel that they need to venture into ASEAN, then India needs to take a step up and lead, because I think the water is rising fast and time is critical. And I'm hoping that this year, whether in the maritime front or any other front, there will be some kind of a tangible outreach from India's side into ASEAN and vice versa. So I'll end with that. The message is that practicality needs to be put in place. People need to understand. Businesses needs to work closely with the governments and with the council. And India need to step up and start leading this, not just the dialogue, but actually the implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Shanti, for your input. I think it was great. What we have been speaking about ASEAN is there's a lot of hope for all of us for the future between India and the ASEAN N bloc. But having said that, we always speak that it can happen, and it's happening. How do we actually work on this? I think it's very important for all businessmen to link with situations. It does not help sometimes unless you don't have the links. So I think in India, you have got a very good platform. The Secretary General of FICCI is on the dais, Dilip Chinoy. FICCI has played a great role for Indian companies to move towards ASEAN. I think that this platform can be shared by everyone. AIBC is playing an important role to see that things happen. We can all work together. I always say that ASEAN-India relationship is a collective responsibility for all of us, whether it's on the business part of it, whether it's on the social part of it, under the cultural part of it. India and ASEAN's relationship has been there for ages. Whenever you speak of ASEAN-India, you see everything is more or less the same. If you go to the Northeast states, linking them with the CMLB countries, you can see their culture, their dances, their food, everything links with each other. If you go to Indonesia, You go to Bali, it's actually Indian culture. You come to Malaysia, you have got a population of 2.8 million people, one of the highest NRIs in the world. So what does that clearly prove? We are already there. But I would like, once again, to say that we all can do it. We all have the advantage of building our relationship, our businesses together. I would like now to just go one round and ask the speakers here, the final call, what do they say? And then we'll wind up the session for the day. And if there are any questions, I saw someone putting up a hand or whatever it is, please do let us know. We'll answer it. Yes. You want to say something? Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. I didn't want I'm Mohan Kumar, I'm the chairman of RIS. I didn't want the ASEAN India Business Council to go back with the impression that there is lack of enthusiasm or interest on the part of India in concluding the RCEP. Having said that, there are some serious issues and I think you should take it back. So I'm not trying to be negative. I think the position of my good friend, Commerce Secretary Rita, prevents her from going further. And Ms. Shanti made some very, very useful points. But let me also give you our perspective. Please. First, bear in mind that you guys all have FTAs among yourselves. India is the only country which does not have an FTA with RCEP partners, right? Yes. So, in one sense, RCEP, to my mind, as an outsider, doesn't make any sense without India. I'm trying to say this without being arrogant. You already have an FTA among yourselves. China has an FTA with ASEAN. India does not have an FTA. It has an FTA with ASEAN, but we are trying to go further. The second point that the Commerce Secretary made, in terms of going beyond goods, we already have an FTA with ASEAN, and the results back home in India, to put it very mildly, is not perceived as greatly positive. Our exports have not, risen as exponentially as we thought it would. Our imports have risen exponentially. For you to tell us that we are going slow is an argument that we can make and say you are going very, very slow in services. You're not making any progress whatsoever. So I can turn that around. You are harping on tariffs and goods. And we all know that the Indian manufacturing is at a stage where it is very difficult for us to be competitive. We are trying very hard, but we are not the factory of the world as China is. So for us, the deal is in services. And if you do not make progress in services, there are people in India who would ask, why do you want to do this? I mean, there are people who are already asking that question. So I think this is important to bear in mind. The other elephant in the room is China. I mean, it is very obvious. For you, it doesn't matter because you already have an FTA with China. You are able to tackle Chinese exports and so on. For us, there is a legitimate fear that this can be used by China to export to India. I'm sure you get that. So with all these things in mind, for you to say India is going slow is less than a fair argument. And I think the ASEAN India Business Council at least should take this on board. We are a democracy. People are asking, why are you doing these FTAs if exports are not rising? It's a kind of Trumpian logic, if you like. I mean, you can make that argument that we are trying to get into global value chains. Your products will become competitive. You will have access to technology, hopefully, from FTAs. FTAs should lead to a rise in technology or investment. I have not done that calculation, but if others do that, that is an argument that we can make to the parliamentary committee and others who are asking us, why do you want to do this? So I think I want businessmen, but especially the ASEAN India Business Council, to take this back home, because it's all too easy to paint India as a disruptive person who's going slow and so on. That is not the whole truth. And I can sometimes be a critic of our own policies and practices, but on this issue, the need for India to tread slowly depends on being able to tackle our own audience, but also an imperative need for ASEAN to make substantial progress in services and investment. Otherwise, it's going to be extremely difficult. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you. I would like to respond on what you have just said.
Let's hear some more questions.
Yeah, let's discuss more questions. I think Dato will be. Yeah, let's take a few more questions and then come back. Ambassador, please.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm Ashok Sajanhar, former Indian ambassador. I have two questions, and I'd like to direct these questions to the Commerce Secretary, Ms. Rita Tiotia. One is, we have had the Agreement on Trade in Goods 2010. As Mohan has said, it has not really yielded the dividends that we were hoping to, we were looking forward. Now, 2015, we also signed the India-ASEAN Agreement on Investments and Services. That has still not been implemented. And, there the ball is very much, I understand, in the ASEAN court. If you could kindly throw some light on that, where are the problems, what are the problems, and when can we see this agreement also being implemented? As far as RCEP is concerned, I thank you for what you said, and I thank Mohan also for what he has said. But not really spending any time on the fact that India is looking for much deeper, better offers in the area of services from ASEAN countries, which we have not seen forthcoming. And that is why, this whole, our desire for a fair, equitable, balanced RCEP, we are getting nowhere that. But you, Madam Commerce Secretary, also referred to the fact that there are trade imbalances within RCEP countries. And there, since the trade imbalance between India and ASEAN is not all that much, I presume you're referring to the trade imbalance between India and China, meaning there also $84 billion bilateral trade and a $52 billion trade deficit with, that India has with China. And there have been sort of, some offers, agriculture, pharma, etc. Would you like to share your thoughts as to when can we see or when can we hope for a significant reduction in this trade imbalance and some sort of move forward where, well, not exactly a balanced trade, but where India's exports to China can show a significant rise, a significant increase? Can we see something of that in the foreseeable future? Thank you.
That's quite a packed. Okay.
This will be my last intervention for today. I wouldn't like to have my good friend Chanti going back home without a missed impression of the 100 containers on the boat and 100 containers on the train. Whatever you are talking about, I hope it does not distort the picture about the importance of the ASEAN connectivity. The heart of that connectivity is multimodal land-based transportation of goods and services, because we have countries on the mainland, which is Myanmar, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, Malaysia, and we have thousands of islands of Indonesia and Philippines that travel using train and roads. And it's the intention of ASEAN to have a good ASEAN highway network of 35,000 kilometers. And now there's no missing link. And the standard is Class C, 2 lanes asphalt surface. That's nearly completed. The 100 containers by overland probably refer to the train from China to Europe. But you know the Chinese, they can split that into 10 convoys. It's easily. 100 containers, 10 times, they can do that easily. But I don't want this analogy to distort the picture of the importance of land transportation of ASEAN. That is the heart of our connectivity. Thank you.
Thank you. I will not respond to my colleague Mohan because that's a self-evident statement and factual, if I may, which he expounded on, and I think he was not asking for any response to that. Before I come to Ambassador, your observations, I think I would like to put the entire conversation of trade agreements into a sort of perspective. Trade agreements are not the only rationale or the only tool by which trade is expanded. Frankly, we have our largest trade and the most favorable balance of trade with countries with whom we do not have trade agreements. So this is not an imperative. This we have to understand. And it is perhaps very, very important to look at the issues of multimodal transport. I did in my talk touch very briefly only on the land route, but Shanti has very clearly brought out the significance of the maritime route and certainly the rail route. And we have to exploit every single one of these transport possibilities in order to be able to move cargo. There is no alternative to a infrastructure connectivity which facilitates trade and movement of goods and people. This is one. The second piece also is the flexibility for movement of people. And this is an integral part of business collaboration and partnerships and trade. This is something that people do not take so easily. The government of India, however, just a year ago, chose to liberalize extensively the movement of business and tourists with this understanding that if businessmen actually travel backwards and forwards between countries, this facilitates actually better understanding of systems, better facilitation of trade, and if people come here to work on a temporary basis, this certainly is something which facilitates services trade. This is not migration. This is not people moving to settle down. So there are different elements on a policy platform that we need to look at. Very specifically on the ASEAN-India trade agreement, this was the kind of pressure that is now trying to be, if I may, with respect, built around RCEP. Let's do goods first. Goods is easy. We'll come to services later. All right. The truth is, today, India has an adverse balance of trade with ASEAN on both goods and services. We are a net importer of services, not a net exporter of services. So the balance of trade on both sides actually rests with ASEAN. So 2010 agreement, what did it result in? There was an exponential growth of imports from ASEAN. There was also a growth of exports from India. It is, in a sense, and I will put that caveat to Mr. Mohan Kumar's comments, that both rose. They rose in the same ratio, but because the adverse balance of trade was there to begin with, India did not benefit, except that the volumes grew for both sides. Inevitably, this happens in all trade agreements. So the effort in RCEP, and this was part of the guiding principles that we agreed on when we started in 2012, that this will be comprehensive. We will make each pillar as strong as the other. Today, the conversations are that in RCEP, the goods, our ambition should be higher than the ASEAN Free Trade Agreement. Therefore, if we have already conceded 86%, we need to go to 92%. In services, however, the thinking is, let's not be too ambitious. Let's stay not above 60%, and that also with caveats, not across all the modes. So the ambition is extremely high for goods, very low on investment, very low on services. And the services also is weak intrinsically because in depth, we need to also see that when you make a commitment in a sector, let's take, say, tourism or anything, you go through modes 1, 2, 3, and 4. The second difficulty with the services discussion is that commitment to current levels of autonomous regimes. Goods requires you to go beyond your current levels of autonomy. That means if my MFN tariff is X, this will be X minus or 0. But in services, the members are hesitant to even commit to autonomous regimes, not even to give a concession. Please understand this. So what is already available to the members is also not a commitment for the future. This is the difficulty, and I think we have worked very hard. There has been no round of the RCEP in which we have not been deeply engaged to point out the challenges that we face with some of the countries with whom we don't have trade agreements. It is Australia, it is New Zealand, and it is China, which is the most important. For Australia and New Zealand also, it is unusual because their entire trade is concentrated in about 4 or 10 sectors, that's it, 4 to 5 sectors. So their sensitivities are not there for the bulk of the lines. So for a broad-based economy, that luxury does not exist. We have sensitivities. We have jobs to protect in this market, and we will have to work in that sense. This agreement has got to be popular, and in order to be popular, it must bring benefit to all the countries. I'll quickly just answer the China question which you raised, which was very specific. Has China begun to open up? So far, I think we will still have to wait it out, because while lines are opened, the access is dependent on approval of actual sites. So if it is say, for rice, we have signed a protocol after 10 years of negotiation to export non-basmati rice. And it is identical to the protocol we had signed 10 years earlier for basmati rice. Not one line, not word changed. And in order to be able to sell, it requires approval of establishments actually packaging, producing, and selling that rice. So that requires a team to come in, approve the sites, and then only can, depending on the interest of merchants on either side, would the trade begin. So I would say that we will have to wait and see the intent, as now the market is open on many, many products, but Indian products are not sold in China, and there are multiple reasons, and it is not so easy. So when Shanti spoke about non-tariff barriers, I was reminded how difficult it is actually to realize the outcomes or the benefits of good trade agreements, comprehensive trade agreements that are signed between countries. But it requires a lot more will and a lot more trust in order for them to really realize the full benefits. And I would say that for this particular audience, the trade agreement is important. We are committed to it, we are working hard on it, but let's not lose track of all the other elements of the partnership which we have to build on, which actually will facilitate much more confidence and trust between us and allow our businessmen to actually do business where it makes sense for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. I think there was a great input. I would just like to respond to Excellency. Excellency, just to inform you that AIBC has always been very supportive to the cause of India and ASEAN. There's no doubt about that. We always feel that as soon as the RCEP can be signed, we have a greater advantage for everyone. And if you see, the ASEAN-India FTA is already there. And we are very supportive to things. But as you understand, that when matters go out of a council, we can only request and tell this is what the council requires, this is what the businessman required. But then the workings are done by the bureaucrats to see how this moves on. So I can assure you that AIBC is always very supportive to see that the ASEAN-Indian relationship moves to greater heights. We play a very key role to facilitate and speak around to say this is to be done. But we have sent papers to the government requesting that what we feel. But beyond that, AIBC's role is limited. So I thank you for once again reminding us on what we have to do. And I think we had a wonderful session today. AIBC is always there to work on ASEAN-India relationship. And I am very sure and very confident that RCEP will go through. Thank you. With that, once again, I would like to thank the speakers on the dais and also thank Vicky here.